Hello, class, and welcome to This Week in Diverse Populations. This week we'll be exploring traditional supports and community-based healing, which are really key elements of culturally responsive counseling. Now, across cultures, healing has historically taken place in community, not in isolation. And communities provide a lot of things. They provide belonging, they provide accountability, they provide spiritual grounding, and also the collective wisdom necessary for recovery, whether it's in indigenous or African or Asian or Latin American traditions. Mental health and wellness are seen as communal responsibilities. And healing involves family, networks, elders, ceremonies, storytelling, and also spiritual connection. Even in our modern urban contexts, community-based programs like peer recovery networks and faith-based initiatives continue in this legacy. So for counselors, understanding these systems means expanding our concept of treatment to include natural supports, family, mentors, peers, and cultural leaders. And by collaborating with these networks, we can design holistic interventions that integrate emotional, spiritual, and relational healing. Now, as always, I like to start off with a little story, so in this lecture is no different, and then we'll cover the three main themes. The first theme being community-based healing and its psychological underpinnings, because healing occurs in relationship and in many diverse populations. It's relationship with others and with nature and with spirit. And these frameworks tend to reject the individualistic models of health and instead emphasize balance and reciprocity. We'll also explore some cross-cultural examples of community-based healing, whether it be indigenous sweat lodges and talking circles, African communal rites, and Latin American networks, all embody principles of shared strength and resilience. And then finally, we'll try to integrate some of this into counseling practice and look at how counselors can collaborate with community networks and traditional healers. And of course, this requires cultural humility and respect for spiritual practices and advocacy for systemic support of culturally grounded services. Now, I want to introduce you today to Dr. Joseph Gahn. He's a leading indigenous psychologist and scholar who has worked to build bridges between kind of the Eurocentric Western mental health systems and more traditional healing practices. He was born in 1968 and was raised in Fort Belknap Indian Reservation in Montana, I believe it's in Montana. And he has spent several decades studying indigenous communities and really trying to conceptualize healing and wellness. And a lot of Gahn's research has emphasized that mental health interventions need to align with community values and cultural practices and understand the historical context. And so he argues that Western evidence-based practices often overlook the relational and spiritual and communal aspects central to indigenous healing. And in his writings, such as Reimagining Mental Health Services for American Indian Communities, Gahn calls for collaboration between clinicians and cultural healers. And his work really illustrates that recovery is not only psychological, it's also social and cultural and spiritual. And Dr. Gahn's insight really is that he encourages counselors to view clients not simply as isolated individuals, but as members of communities, and that healing is strongest when it's grounded in collective identity and supported by traditions that affirm cultural continuity. And so that kind of ties into today's lecture, and I think he's a good support. And if you ever have an opportunity to do any research in this area, I would encourage you to read some of Dr. Gahn's work. As far as community-based healing frameworks, they all seem to, in general, rest on the principle that health and recovery emerges from relationships between individuals, families, of course, and with the wider community. And so that really does differentiate it from the Western clinical models and emphasizes the kind of theme that we've been talking about in this class, and that there's a shared process of balance and connection that goes on. So the whole concept of collective efficacy really suggests that communities possess inherent strengths, and that there are already rough and ready resources that support recovery and resilience for most people. And these include social networks and cultural rituals and shared values that nurture belonging and accountability. So from an ecological perspective, healing is relational. It occurs at multiple levels of interaction. It's individual, it's interpersonal, it's community, it's societal, and this really resonates strongly with Indigenous and other traditional worldviews, which locate the self within a web of relationships rather than as a separate entity. And community-based healing, therefore, restores harmony disrupted by things like trauma, community trauma, individual trauma, inherited trauma, as well as addiction and social disconnection. And it does that by fostering trust and inclusion and shared meaning with the community. So it's about feeling like you belong to the community. That can be a huge part of the recovery process. And community healing, of course, takes many forms, but it shares some core values of interdependence and collective responsibility. The African philosophy of Ubuntu that we've talked about, where I am because we are, really kind of emphasizes that whole communal ethos of healing. And that's something that we see when we look at recovery programs in South Africa, for example. It's guided by that principle, and it's group-based, and it emphasizes mutual care and moral responsibility. Latin America also fosters a fairly similar concept that is very strong on kinship networks. And it's where the extended family, and particularly godparents, support individuals in times of crisis. So there are also, of course, community celebrations and religious rituals and mutual aid groups that function as spaces of solidarity and emotional support for people. In the Asian context, it's even stronger. We have a very collectivist tradition that emphasizes harmony and mindfulness and group meditation. And to some extent, the Buddhist tradition, and for sure the Confucian influence practices, really prioritize community cohesion and emotional regulation as pathways to healing. And so recognizing some of those strengths can go a long ways to help with healing as well. Now, of course, there's always the challenge, because when something is that powerful, it can also be a challenge. So, but recognizing that these things simply exist goes a long way to help guide the counselor to work with the client to find a foundation for healing, a healing that is relational and spiritual and deeply embedded, particularly within community life, can be very powerful and very resilient. And then, of course, we can look at indigenous healing systems as well, and the holistic worldview that links the mental and the physical and the emotional and the spiritual wellness of the community and the environment. So traditional supports are things, ceremonies such as the sweat lodge or talking circles or smudging rituals, which promote cleansing and balance and guidance. Also storytelling, transmitting cultural knowledge, affirming identity and belonging while allowing participants to process trauma collectively can be very powerful. Elders serve as cultural anchors and teachers. They embody wisdom and humility and relational ethics. And their presence ensures that healing aligns with community values and sacred teachings. And language revitalization and land-based practices further strengthen identity and purpose, particularly for those in addiction recovery. In counseling, integrating these kind of traditional supports requires, of course, respect and consultation with community leaders. So it isn't a core part of what the counselor is doing, but it's still an important part of the healing process. And that's the thing that I really want to kind of highlight in this, is that there's more to healing than just what goes on in the counselor's office. Community resilience is something that all counselors should be advocating for and working with the community to help to build. And that's really the community's capacity to recover from adversity through mutual support and cultural strength and collective action. And in the context of addiction and mental health, resilience is not simply an individual trait. It is built and sustained through connection and identity and belonging. And research shows that communities that with strong cultural identity and social cohesion and access to traditional supports have lower rates of substance abuse and higher recovery outcomes. And these communities emphasize collective recovery, where individuals heal through participation in shared rituals and social rules and cultural expression. And the basic idea here is that when you are actively a part of a community, you have something to live for. And it helps with decision making. It helps with understanding where you belong. It helps to revive cultural practices. And all of this strengthens both the personal well-being and communal well-being. And so counselors working within this kind of framework act as facilitators. They help clients reconnect with their communities rather than positioning themselves simply as the experts with the only answers. And so by integrating community healing into counseling, we are partnering between professional practice and cultural tradition. And this integration really acknowledges that wellness is relational. It requires both clinical and extra-clinical resources, communal resources, basically. And so when counselors engage with cultural practitioners like traditional healers or faith leaders or elders to co-facilitate interventions that align with community norms, having group counseling models, talking circles, things that complement both evidence-based therapies, cognitive behavioral therapy or narrative therapy, and with traditional approaches, we can build something very powerful together. And so successful integration requires humility on both sides and collaboration on both sides. And so we need to kind of recognize where we're the expert in and where we're not, and to work with the other to build this up. Now, I want to just kind of look a little bit at a bit of a case study. How do we blend tradition and therapy? Let's take a look at David. David's 32 years old. He's living on a reservation, and he's recovering from opioid use disorder. He's had years of trauma in his life and years of incarceration, and he struggled with depression and a feeling of disconnection from his culture. And his counselor, who's trained in trauma-informed cognitive behavioral therapy, recognized that clinical interventions alone weren't doing the job quite well enough. And working with David and discussing, they developed a dual path treatment plan that integrated therapy and traditional ceremony. And David participated in his weekly counseling sessions, to address his cognitive distortions that are linked to his guilt and his shame. And at the same time, he was attending sweat lodge ceremonies facilitated by an elder from his community. And the combination of reflective dialogue and spiritual cleansing rituals helped him to reconnect with his identity and his family and his sense of purpose. And I think this case really kind of illustrates that healing is most effective when rooted in both psychological understanding and cultural belonging. And by involving elders and community supports, counselors reinforce recovery as a process of reconnection rather than symptom management. Now, always need to talk about ethical practice here, because ethical practice, particularly in community-based and traditional healing partnerships, is something that requires, as always, humility, but respect and an awareness of different power dynamics. Counselors might not feel powerful, but they are. And they also need to recognize that cultural knowledge is not public domain. It belongs to the communities and to the elders who preserve it. And before incorporating cultural elements like songs and ceremonies, consult with those that are leaders and get permission from cultural authorities for that process. And ideally invite them in to collaborate on this. Now, of course, there needs to be maintaining of informed consent and confidentiality, and all of that is essential when working with community-based settings. So group and family contexts are often going to involve shared storytelling, but clients must understand how information will be used and protected. And I guess what I'm saying is that we still need to have proper ethical practice, professional practice, and need to avoid cultural appropriation. And that's the key, I think, in this humble and collaborative process. So when we integrate traditional healing with Western counseling frameworks, we're really kind of dealing with a number of challenges that we need to navigate fairly carefully. Many institutions, first off, just lack formal pathways for recognizing traditional healers or compensating them as equal collaborators. And this kind of systemic exclusion often limits the inclusion of community knowledge in treatment programs. And the differences in worldview can also create a bit of a tension. Western psychology tends to focus on individual pathology, whereas traditional systems emphasize relational balance and spirituality. Counselors need to bridge these paradigms through open dialogue and mutual respect. And so balancing evidence-based practice with cultural authenticity requires some flexibility. Now, while some traditional methods may not have empirically validated evidence in Western science, they may have centuries of experiential credibility. And so counselors should advocate for some expansion of definitions and work to understand different ways of knowing, because not everything needs to be empirical. I guess is what I'm saying. And of course, I always need to remind you that cultural humility is the key here. It's at the heart of all of these approaches, and it's at the heart of community-based and traditional healing integration in your practice as well. Counselors need to engage in the kind of self-reflection and examination of their own cultural background and biases, and recognizing how people view their power and the dynamics that are there, rather than approaching as experts. Counselors become learners, they become allies. And the shift in posture allows for some genuine partnership that reduces the risk of imposing an outside framework. And so practitioners should regularly ask themselves, how does my positionality affect my understanding of healing? And whose voices am I centering in this process? And engaging with elders and attending cultural events and learning from traditional healers also helps to deepen understanding and respect. So having a relationship can be very important. And finally, when we kind of come to close out this lecture, the four things that I kind of want you to kind of remember here from this lecture. First off, what is community-based healing? It's really healing that's understood as a shared process. It involves the individual, of course, and the individual's family, as well as cultural groups, the community, and the collective traditions. And the intention is there that we're not isolating the individual's recovery, but we're bringing the individual's recovery into the community. We're still respecting privacy, of course, but where the individual is willing and interested in doing so, to bring in other parts of healing as well. As far as cultural resilience, we need to remember that there's a great strength that emerges from maintaining cultural identity and values despite all the adversity that they face. And this resilience often stems from things like language and ritual and social connection. And of course, there's the need for cultural humility, that we need to continually self-reflect and respect cultural differences. And when it comes to the quiz question, what would be a good description for the goal of community-based healing? And I would suggest that it is restoring balance and connection within community. Healing is not confined to the individual, but occurs through a shared responsibility and a collective renewal. And that, I think, is a key part of what I'm wanting to talk about today. So as we close out today's lecture, I want to remind you that working in the community as part of the community can be a powerful way to bring about healing, not only to the individual, but giving strength to the individual and to the community as well. True wellness belongs with balance and reaffirmation of cultural values and depends on belonging. Community-based healing frameworks really kind of remind us, I think, that the role of the counselor isn't to cure or fix, it's to connect. It's to facilitate spaces for growth and healing. And that, I think, is a good reminder that this is a big part of a addiction counselor's job. It means collaboration with elders and cultural leaders and community organizations, at the very least to honor the traditional places, and ideally to bring about strength and resilience to the individual and the community, because community-based approaches are powerful because they unite psychology with culture and spirit and social harmony. And as Dr. Yagon reminds us, the future of counseling lies in reconciliation. Reconciliation between Western science and Indigenous wisdom, between individual care and collective wellness. And I think that's a very powerful reminder. Hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I will see you next week. You take care. Bye-bye.